Okay. Can you hear me? We're going to do this live. All right. So this ended up getting a bit screwed up here. I'm going to go back up here. Um, okay, so I'm going to do another Express application a little bit faster. Let me go up here. Just a little bit smaller. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to start out by adding a file called app.js. And so sort of standard couple of lines for an Express app is going to be to bring in Express. You probably want to install it locally when you do that. Second thing is to at least create the application. You do that by saying Express. That actually creates the app. So this tells you that whatever is being exported from this module is in fact a function, and we're going to want to listen. So I'm going to say app.listen. And I'm going to give you the ability to pass in the port. If you don't pass it in, I'm going to do this on 8080. And I'm going to run this with NodeMon. Before I do it, let me just say npm init. And this is going to create a package JSON file for me. And I'm going to say npm install express, save. Again, if you installed it globally, you don't have to, but you're still going to want to get that in the package JSON file just in case anyone ends up using it, which hopefully they will. And I'm going to say nodemon app.js. This is going to run. I go over here and I say localhost 8080. Nothing here is happening. Let's try to figure out why. Web page is not available. Let's take a look. And it's not available because it's not list, it's listen. Something is not quite right about this, but let's just see what's happening. Yeah, I think you know what's happening is I'm actually not writing to a file. And so just try to get that window to save. So now I knew something was wrong because I wasn't seeing the code in with the color format. That's because I didn't know that it was a JavaScript file. So now when I run this, go back over here. See why that's the case. Let's go back here. $80.80. A little bit strange. I'm going to kill this. Let me just see that this is actually running. I'm going to do a possible that it's listening on another port, but I don't think so. Okay. Still nothing. So let's just see if, for whatever reason, there's a little bit of a mystery happening here. Let's take a look. Something is a little screwy. Here's my node modules. Here's my app. Here's Express. App.listen. Let's actually just do this, but I don't really expect that to be any different. So this is what starts your server. It looks like the server is definitely starting. The thing I could think of is something is maybe caching here. Let's change this. I'm going to change this to 3000. So let's switch this up. And let me do one other thing. And I don't really expect this to be the case, but I think there's just something I'm missing here. Require Express. Here's a new app. The app's listening at a port. I don't expect this to do anything. And I'll explain what this is in a minute. All right, now I'm getting a little concerned. So let's see what I could be missing. Here's Express. App.listen. All pretty much looks the same. Here's Express. Let's do this. I'm just going to cheat a little bit. This doesn't make any sense at all. I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to say, I don't think this is going to do anything, but let's just try it out. I'm going to uninstall Express. I'm going to install it again. And let's try this one more time. Really a bit of a mystery to me. Let's see what this, how we could go about trying to figure this out. So let's just see if anything pops up when we look at our app. There's our app. One of the things you can do is that I'm a bit baffled by this. I might try to do this one more time. I'm going to kill this. Let's make another Express app. It really has never happened to me, to be honest with you. I'm going to kill a bunch of things here. TD Express 3. Open this up. Create an app. Start off with the basics. Okay, that looks okay. Let's Express equals require Express. And app equals call Express to create the app. App.listen on a port 8080. We even open up a new window. Maybe something was caching. Okay, so I don't know what was going on before. I think there was something weird that was caching on the browser. So I apologize for that. I'm not sure what that was, but this is the extent of the most basic Express app that you could get. Here's your app, and you're listening on a port. Again, we might want to do this. Process environment. You might want to pass your port in as an environment variable, in which case I can kill this, and I can say port equals 3000 nodemon app.js. In which case it's going to start on port 3000, and if I went back here and I put in 3000, okay? Now, what happens here is that Express will go and will try to determine a route. I mean, you're making a request to the server, and so there's a route that comes in. In our case, the route is just the home route, which is /. And the problem is that it can't find a route for this. So if I want to create a route, I can do that by telling Express, here's the route, and I've got to put a function here. This function is part of the Express pipeline, and this function actually has a special name. It's called a piece of middleware. If I was to do this and reload this, what would happen is now you can see this is spinning. And what's happening is that this is not loading because it's my responsibility to make sure that when this function gets called, there's two objects that are going to get passed, actually three, a request and a response. And it's up to me to handle the response by saying, hey, look, the response I'm going to send, and I'm just going to send the string foo here. Now, if I reload this, I'll see that this will end up coming back. Again, determine when this callback gets called, but Express is going to end up sending you a response, calling this piece of middleware. You're going to get access to the request. I mean, things you could end up getting from the request. What if I just wanted to send the request? What would that look like? And I think it's a circular structure. There might be, what if we said object.keys request? We could see all the keys in the request object. So for instance, we could see our URL. Again, this doesn't make a lot of sense, but if we just wanted to send the string request URL, our URL is /. So one of the things you can you're going to want to basically send something back more meaningful. If we wanted to, we could send back some HTML with a body. Put in some text. And assuming our server is restarting, let's see if we get an error here. So we get an error that there's an illegal token. And that's because we did. So what happens is that when your Express crashes, that's basically it. It crashes. So you have to sort of handle those scenarios. So here we end up getting this back. So there's a question. And again, by the way, if the video does go out with this is going to get posted and the video won't be going out. So if you want to listen, you can just do that, and I'll post this up afterwards. Yeah, you can use Browser Sync with NodeMon. It's a little bit, it's not that it's that hard to do, but basically you have to tell Browser Sync what port your app is running on. And so we could do that. I'll do an example of that, probably not tonight, but a little bit later on. So, right now the takeaway here up to this point is that you could create an Express application, you could listen, and you could set your routes, and you're responsible for sending a response back. I just want to throw one other thing out here, is that not only can you use, so when you do this, you're basically saying, hey, look, if a request comes in and it's a GET request, I want to return this route. Just as an aside, I specified that this would only work for a post, and I went to rerun this, it would say you can't do a GET. You could only do a post with that. So there are tools we'll use to be able to test this stuff out. Let me switch this back to GET. And let me just talk a little bit about the Express pipeline. You have the ability to also say, hey, look, we don't care what the verb is. We always want to use this piece of middleware. And again, it's a function, but in the language of Express, it's also a piece of middleware. It's part of the Express pipeline. And the order is important here. This function is going to get called for every request. If I did nothing in that callback, this would just hang forever. And the reason why it's hanging forever is that it's up to me to specify that I'm done with this piece of middleware. The way that I can do that is that there's a third parameter that gets passed here, which is going to be a function called next, similar to our done function. And if I call next, then it'll go through and it'll hit the next piece of applicable middleware, which would be this. And now I'm back to getting this page back. So let's talk a little bit about how we can make this a little better instead of actually sending HTML back to the browser. So one of the things that Express has built in is the idea to render pages with a render engine. We'll talk a little bit about what a render engine is, but I'm going to, instead of response.send, I'm going to say render. And I'm going to render index. And if I rerun this, I'm going to get an error message, and it's going to say that's fine, but you can't just tell me to render the index. I don't know what rendering engine you want to use. There's any number of rendering engines. There's rendering engines called Jade, called Swig, called Slim. We're going to end up using Swig in some of the workshops, but what I'm going to use here is Jade, and I'm going to specify that I want to set my view engine to Jade. Now, when I run this, it's going to say that's fine, that view engine exists. By the way, you might, when you run this, you might see that Jade is not installed, and if it isn't, you could sort of do your standard npm install, and I'm going to install both Jade and Express and save. And again, you might run into that if, I think I must have Jade installed globally or something like that. Let me go back to NodeMon and start this for 3000. So now it's giving me a different error message. It's saying, hey, look, I can't find this view. And by default, it looks in a views folder with the name index.jade. If I go over here and I add a folder called views, and I add a page called index.jade, this message will go away, but I'm not going to get much of a response. So Jade is a nice syntax. Instead of worrying about opening and closing tags, you could write some Jade like this. So head, body, I could put a div in here and say hello world. So Jade is purely based, it's based on indenting. And again, in the end, the browser only understands HTML behind the scenes. When Jade ends up getting this page, it's going to know how to, one word for it is to compile, and it's going to compile itself to HTML. So now I've got this hello world. To see if there's anything else on here I got to take a look at. So let me just ask. This is good so far. You could let me know. What I want to do here is that when I render out this view, I also want you to realize that a rendering engine is a little bit more complex, where you have the ability to pass some data. And you pass data with this second parameter. And again, this is the way that all the view engines work. So here I'm going to pass a second parameter, and I'm going to say title equals home. And now if I were to go back here to this template, and I wanted to have a H1 on the next line down, I could use the equal sign and say, hey, look, I want you to look for the variable title. And now I'll see the word home. So this is just a very, very sort of simple template engine that we could end up taking a look at. The next thing that I want to do is take a quick look at what's called static routes. So right now, let's say that I wanted to put a style sheet here. So I would say style, excuse me, it's going to be link. And the way that you specify attributes with Jade is with basically key values. So in order for a style sheet to be a style sheet, you have to say related style sheet, and a style sheet has an href. And let's say that I had a public folder. I had a file called styles.css. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a public folder. And within this, I'm going to add styles.css. And I'm going to say body color is going to be red. Now, if I go and I look at this, and I open up and I take a look and see what's coming back here, I'll see that I'm not seeing the styles.css. And that's a result of the fact that it's not just going to serve up pages because you request them, right? That would be a huge security issue. But what you have the ability to do here is you have the ability to set up a static route. And the way that a static route ends up getting set up is that usually you put this all the way on the top, because again, if there's just a static page that's getting returned, you want to return it as soon as you can. There's no other processing that needs to be done. And so I'm going to say app.use express has a static method, and I could put in the name of a folder. The way that this is going to work is that this is going to basically mark that public folder as being a static folder. And any request that comes in, it's going to look and see if it can find that path within that folder. So a first cut is always to sort of do this, but then when I rerun this, it's still not going to find it. And the reason why it doesn't find it is that when you end up creating a static route in a folder, you don't have to specify the folder. You just specify the path. The folder is what we would call mounted as a static route. So it's going to look in that public folder. In this case, I should see this stuff turning red. So that's sort of a quick introduction on how a static route would end up getting set up. I want to do a couple of other real quick things here. I want to use Bootstrap. So Bootstrap is a CSS framework that's going to give me some styles right off the bat. So in order to install it, I'm going to say npm install bootstrap, save. And what that's going to do is it's going to go out and it's going to end up getting Bootstrap. See, it's a pretty quick process. And if I go back over here, I'll see. So one thing that I'm not actually seeing it here. And the reason why I'm not seeing it is that in order for it to save somewhere, it's actually going to look for a package JSON file. So I'm just going to say npm init. You're always going to want to have a package JSON file. Again, I didn't put it in. I should have probably done that. npm init creates the package JSON file. Now I'm going to install Bootstrap and I'm going to save. Now if I go back up here, I should see my node modules folder, and here is Bootstrap. And what I want to do is I also want to use Bootstrap has some nice styles built into it. Here I'm going to want to use Bootstrap. But Bootstrap's in the node modules folder. And I'm going to want to get Bootstrap, dist, CSS. It's bootstrap.css. And you can actually see this if you drill down a little bit. Here's my bootstrap.css. And I want to actually get that route. Right now, if I did this, and let me make sure I start my server. Now my server is started. You can see I'm not getting Bootstrap. And the reason why I'm not getting Bootstrap is that I've got this app.js folder. And I want to set up another route so it'll also look inside of node modules. And now, if I run this, it'll end up loading Bootstrap. So I know that because I could see the text change as well. Bootstrap puts a default like Helvetica style there. And what I'm going to do here, Bootstrap sort of likes things to be inside of a div called container. So one thing that Jade lets you do is that if you end up just putting a dot here, it's going to assume you want to have a div. If you didn't want a div, you could put a P there, but I want a div, so I'm going to keep that as a dot, and it'll sort of center things here. So I'm going to do a little navigation so I can create a couple of pages here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Bootstrap. I'm going to put an unordered list here, which is going to be nav tabs. I'm going to put a list item here. And again, this is all just getting used to Jade. I'm going to put a link here. I'm going to say href equals /, and this is going to be the string, the link home. And this will be foo. And if I go to run this, I'll see that this link works, yet this link is broken. Now, I could get this link to work pretty easily by going in here and adding another route for foo. And if I went over here, I could put in foo, and just to differentiate these pages, I'll call this foo. But now I've got home, I've got foo. I'll leave it as an exercise to how you might want to highlight these to show what page you're on. I'll give you a hint in that if you, again, this is pure Bootstrap stuff, but Bootstrap says that if you have a list item with nav tabs and you make this active, and again, if you haven't done a lot of CSS before, that's fine. We're going to end up covering a lot of it, but for those of you that have, you could experiment with this a little bit. So again, here's my home. I can't get back over here because if this is active, it doesn't actually let me click on it. But I leave that as an exercise to show which one of these is active. So one other thing that I want to do here is show you that you don't have to necessarily put all of your routes into one file. And so you have the ability to actually create another router, a router, which will define routes, and then you could pull those routes into your application. The way that you do that is, let's say that I added a file, and I'm going to call this foo.router.js. And the way that you end up creating a router is you bring in Express, and you create a router, not an app, but a router by saying Express router. It's an uppercase R, just because it's a constructor. And now you have the ability to set some routes. So I'm going to say route.get/. This might look a little bit weird, but what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to actually get rid of my foo route that's in my main page, and I'm going to say response.send, render, use my view engine index, and send the second parameter title foo. Now, this is the exact same code that's inside of this other page here. I'm actually going to pull this out. And so right now, if I just did that, and I reloaded this and I tried to go to foo, I would get an error. But what I'm going to do in this main page is that I'm going to use this router. And the way that this router is going to get used, I'm going to say app.get. And what Express does, I'm going to say anything that comes in with foo as starting its route, I want you to use, and I want you to use the foo router. So I'm doing a require here. This is something I wrote. That's why you see the /. Here's foo router. Unfortunately, if I go over here, I'm going to see that I'm going to get an error. And the reason why I get an error is it says this is not really legal. What you're doing here, you need to have some, this needs to be a route. This needs to be a piece of middleware, right? This needs to be another function or another route. And what I neglected to do in foo.router, and this is just the way that Express works, is that I want to say module.exports equals this router. And so this gives you the ability to sort of nest routes together here. If I go back, it should actually give me the foo route. Let's just see why it's not. So here's my router. Here's my app. Here's my foo router. Let's just see what might be happening there. So let's actually see if it's going in here. The router is getting exported, router.get. I'm sorry, I made a mistake here. It's not app.get foo. That would actually just set up another foo route, which is not what I wanted. It actually is going to be app.use. So that's how you actually use other routes. I apologize for that. So now if I do that, and we've got to actually set up some better event handling. So here is foo. And just to sort of show you the whole nesting property here, this is going to be app.use. Again, under the covers, Express is looking and seeing what your route is that you're requesting, what your resource is that you're requesting. And just to sort of do one other thing here, I was to go over here and sort of nest bar under this, that would give me the ability. So now again, this is getting pulled in. So if I went back to my views, save that. If I go down here, I could say this is actually going to go to food.bar. And so now I've got this nested route. You can see this is changing up here. And so that gives you an indication of sort of the main things that you're going to, sort of the basics that you need to get set up with Express. Again, as a starting point, it's pulling in the Express app, creating the app, and listening. You could use some environment variables. You could end up specifying, here's a GET request on the app. And so this is, going to be just if someone requests a slash. You could also end up using a router. Things that we didn't end up covering are things like how you could send parameters to Express, but that's not all that hard to do. It's just going to be a question of catching them here with variables. And again, there's just sort of a placeholders that you could end up using to have routing parameters that are not predefined. I think that to some degree that wraps up what I wanted to take a look at with Express. I'm going to put this link up in place of the other ones that we had, but I'm going to stop this and I'll actually go back to Slack.